Welcome to Down to Earth Vegetable Gardening Down South by Lacy F. Bullard with C. Art Creek. Working with nature to grow your own vegetables. Preface. Everybody knows that the South is noted for its climate, which sets it apart from the rest of the country. It seems strange, then, that so little information is available on growing vegetables in that unique climatic situation. Call it the deep Gulf South, or the southern coastal plain, or what you will. It covers an area extending roughly from the middle of the Florida Peninsula north to the Georgia hills, and from the Carolina coasts on the east to the Mississippi Delta and beyond on the west. In that area, it is possible to grow vegetables all year long, if you know how. Apparently, an increasing number of people want to know how. This book is meant to help them. For our climate is astonishing and confusing to gardeners from other places, and frustrating to beginners who can neither look it up nor learn it from daddy. People not only want better, fresher produce, they want to save money. Unquestionably, growing your own vegetables can mean real savings in the family food budget. The following number of vegetable questions from readers of a gardening column I write for the Tallahassee Democrat is a good evidence of the quickened interest in food growing here over the last couple of years. The queries Art Cheek gets relating to his WFSU TV program on vegetable gardening confirm this trend. With all this in mind, we undertook to write this book, Art and I. It is based on Odd's 30 years of gardening experience, and primarily his backyard gardening in Tallahassee. It is the how and why of one successful gardener, so it does not contain a great variety of alternate methods. And it does not claim to expound the one true way. Numerous magazines and newspaper articles have been written about some of the things Art does. Using techniques described in this book, he harvests enough excellent produce for several families from a 20 by 200 foot plot in his backyard that he cultivates in his leisure time. Has built a super soil from the average loam over clay of his suburban lot. Has grown crops like asparagus that some say can't be grown here. Plus a variety of vegetables that include corn, Jerusalem artichokes, broccoli, cauliflower, okra, limas, butter beans, bush and pole beans, coyote, eggplant, beets, carrots, lettuce, peanuts, potatoes, pumpkin, Swiss chard, spinach, English peas, squash, and numerous herbs. Art raises spectacular tomatoes, weighing on average more than a pound each. Grows it all organically, not because of any conscious effort to put a philosophy into practice, but because I think I can grow better flavored vegetables with more food value this way. The publication of information like this has evoked tremendous interest. The purpose of this book is to tell how art does it. Use it and share art's conviction. You can do it too. Special thanks go out to Sam Westbrook, who did the illustrations and much of the layout and design. Earl Warren, who took the cover photograph, and Paul C. Willis, associate editor of the Tallahassee Democrat, and an experienced gardener himself, who read the manuscript. Any errors that remain are not his, but mine. Lacy Bullard, Tallahassee, 19. Introduction. Why garden anyway? There are about as many reasons as there are gardeners. Speaking for myself, gardening gives me a great deal of pleasure and personal satisfaction. There's the pleasure of exercise and being outdoors, of course, and the pleasure of eating better vegetables. Any vegetable is better, fresh picked, than after it is shipped and stored and displayed in the commercial food marketing system. Growing my own lets me pick each vegetable at its peak of ripeness and flavor, and when its vitamin content is the highest. I can have the smallest, crispest carrots and the tenderest peas, the sweetest corn and luscious, truly fine ripened tomatoes, and save on the food bill at the same time. I also have the advantage, as a home gardener, of being able to grow varieties that taste great, but haven't been bred to stand the green picking and rough handling involved in commercial harvest and shipment. For me, there's still another pleasure in gardening too. There's nothing quite like standing in the garden early in the morning with the first sunlight on tasseling corn, and the good smell of the earth and growing things in the air. It's a feeling of being part of something bigger and greater, a part of nature, really. And the way I garden is a part of nature because I do it all organically. That is, I use only natural materials, not chemical fertilizers, to enrich and build up the soil. And I use no persistent pesticides or herbicides in my gardening. The next question, then, is why organically? There are those who picture the organic gardener as one who uses no controls for pests or weeds, plants marigolds in his vegetable patch, plows his garden with a mule or by hand because the gasoline engine of a tractor or tiller is polluting to the environment, and so on. Probably there are gardeners who fit this pattern, and certainly it is their right and privilege. As a matter of fact, since the initial rototilling of my present garden, I haven't used anything but a spade or a hand plow in it. This is not a matter of principle with me. It's just that the soil I've made organically is that easy to work. But those who imply that the extreme approach is the only way to garden organically are mistaken, I think. The same goes for the pseudoscientific experiments conducted usually by those in the agricultural chemicals, where two garden plots are planted side by side. Both are watered, but one is treated with a full range of chemical fertilizers, pesticides, and herbicides, while the other, organic plot is left strictly alone, or perhaps a quart or two of ladybugs is dumped on it. The failure of the untreated plot is supposed to refute all arguments in favor of organic gardening. All this ignores, by choice or through ignorance, the fact that there are many controls available to the gardener that don't always involve the use of persistent pesticides and poisons, and they are used successfully all the time. To me, gardening organically means working with nature instead of against it, keeping the balance instead of destroying it. This takes some study and experiment along the way to understanding, but I think it's worth it. Judging by the increasing number of gardeners, young and old, beginners and experts, who are coming to me and saying, "I want to try it your way," a lot of other people think it's worth it too. Let me say, I'm no crusader. I've gardened both organically and using chemicals in a limited way. So can you. I'm just convinced that the organic approach is the real answer to a healthier, better way of life. And a lot of the world's problems, too. One way or another, we have upset nature's balance by polluting, by continually taking out natural resources without putting enough back. It's kind of like a bank account. If deposits don't keep ahead of withdrawals, you're in for trouble. A garden is a good example of that kind of thing. If we continually misuse the soil by growing plants that take out of its nutritive substances and let its organic matter be depleted without recycling anything back in, we are guilty of robbing and find ourselves in trouble. Vegetables can't have vitamins and minerals unless they get them from the soil where they are grown. I started a lot of my organic gardening practices years before I knew that experts in the field were advocating them. Later on, I read a lot and learned more and found out that I wasn't all that original. I was using seaweed to mulch a coastal garden I had and saving my wood ashes for the garden before I ever read that these were good organic practices. I used these materials because they were available to me at no cost, and the experiments worked. Should any gardener, beginner, or experienced go all organic, all at once? Possibly, but if so, the gardener shouldn't expect tremendous success the first year or even the second. The natural way is a building process that is slow, but better and safer in the long run. And each year, it should get better and better results. The reason is, I think, that success in organic gardening is based first of all on a healthy soil. A newly made garden hasn't had time to build up on the deep, friable soil full of nutrients and the microorganisms that break them down and make them available to plant roots. A garden that has been grown with chemical fertilizers and treated with chemical pesticides and herbicides will have built up residues that may hamper the natural functions of the soil in one way or another. It will take some time to bring the system back into balance. My advice to gardeners beginning to work organically is to grow a variety of vegetables so that success with some will offset failure with others. And there will be crop failures, as there are with any method of gardening. Failures even the experienced gardener can't explain. For instance, I seem to be able to grow really successful bumper crops of broccoli and cauliflower about 1 year in 3. I've switched locations, planting times, done everything I've thought of so far, and I still can't explain the failures. I do know, though, that even if I were guaranteed 2 failures to every successful crop of these vegetables, they are such a delight, I'd grow them anyway. There are always so many others to harvest. We don't miss these too much if we don't have lots of them. If we do, it's just a pleasant bonus. Besides, I may learn their secrets someday. And it is a challenge like this that makes gardening so much fun. The approach to gardening by organic methods should be, first of all, building up the soil, and secondly, doing progressively less and less chemically. Don't be surprised if the second follows the first quite naturally. In my gardening, it took several years to reach the point where I used only organic methods of control. For pests, I think the last chemical control I used was 7 Dust for worms on tomatoes in 1965. That was 9 years ago, and since then, I haven't had any more worms on tomato plants that I could keep picked off by hand, with the help of their natural predators, of course. That brings up a final point. A little changed philosophy may be necessary for the switch to organic gardening methods. Control of pests to tolerable numbers, not total eradication, is the key to balance in the garden. And a system of checks and balances working together is my idea of what organic gardening is all about. I hope none of this sounds so complicated that it discourages anyone from gardening. I don't want anybody to think he can't start today and do something to make his soil and his garden better than it was. The important thing is to get started, even if that means growing 1 tomato plant in a pot. The rewards are far greater than the expense in time and money or any possible disappointment. See Art Cheek. Break. Are you looking for the adventure of a lifetime? Sign up for a Storm Navigator tour and see some of the most amazing storms America has to offer at www.stormnavigator.biz. End break. Chapter 1. Dirt by any other name. Red ripe tomatoes still warm to touch and tasting of the sun. The smell of the earth and the feel of it. To fingers exploring eagerly for the first tiny new potatoes, radishes, the brightest and most beautiful, and the first you ever grew. What do the words vegetable garden bring to mind for you? For lots of people, it's just plain dirt. For many years, Better Homes and Gardens magazine carried a monthly column called The Diary of a Plain Dirt Gardener. It was a good column, based on the struggles of a suburban gardener, and probably led many a reader to growing his own, and some of us to writing about it. The trouble is that, although the gardener-writer never said so, the title implied that the true gardener deals with plain, honest dirt. Therefore, plain dirt is good dirt, etc. Since the early settlers, sod busters in the Midwest, plowed up the last of the virgin prairies of our Great Plains, few people anywhere have gardened with spectacular success in plain dirt. You won't either. If you want the maximum rewards for your efforts, especially when it's so easy to build up a growing medium in rich and plant nutrients, water retentive, yet light and crumbly, so perfect for growing things that it's too good to be called dirt. Soil is the word. You can adopt nature's methods of turning dirt to soil and speed them up to suit your needs. Before you begin building, though, you should know what you have to start with. Consider your dirt's physical composition. If it is a very heavy clay, it is made up of very small particles that compact easily and don't let oxygen in. When it is dry, it assumes an almost rock-like hardness. When it gets wet, it holds too much water, becoming a gummy mud. Sandy earth, on the other hand, doesn't have these problems, but it has some all its own. The individual particles of sand average around 25 to 30 times larger than those of clay. There is no shortage of oxygen because air moves freely through it. So does water, and any water-soluble nutrient too, freely. They pass through sand quickly and are soon far beyond the reach of plant roots that could absorb them. Clay or sand or a mixture of the two, plus dust, bits of rock, etc., make up dirt. With the addition of organic material, this becomes soil, the good garden loam that is basic to growing the healthy, vigorous plants every gardener wants. This soil will let air and roots pass through easily, yet it will hold moisture, and it is full of living organisms, the bacteria that are good guys, doing their job of breaking down nutrients into forms that plants can use. Chemical fertilizers will grow plants by furnishing the necessary nutrients immediately, but in doing so, they don't improve the quality of the soil itself. There is no enhancement of its moisture retentive quality or tilth. Often, as time passes, increasing amounts of chemical fertilizers are necessary because of the deteriorating quality of the soil lets them reach out more readily. The building and maintenance of the soil by continually adding organic material pays off in better garden produce, whether you use chemical fertilizers and pest controls or choose the organic way. Organic material that you add to the garden can be in the form of compost, animal manure, green manure, cover crops. In fact, almost anything in the animal or vegetable kingdom. As any reader of fertilizer bags might have gathered, growing plants must have three basic nutrients. They are nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. The percentage of these in 100 pounds of commercial fertilizer is expressed in numbers that give a particular blend of fertilizer its name. Thus, a bag of 475 will contain 4% nitrogen, 7% potassium, 4% nitrogen, 7% phosphorus, and 5% potassium or potash. The rest of the 100 pounds is made up of a conditioner and or a filler. The conditioner, which keeps the fertilizer from getting too hard, will be something like rice or peanut hulls. The filler, sand, lime rock, phosphate, or dolomite tailings. There are trace elements that are quite important to plant nutrient too, like zinc, boron, etc. These are incorporated in some commercial fertilizer mixtures or can be applied alone, if tests show your soil needs them. If you are adding a sufficient variety and quality of these organic materials to your soil on a continuing basis, these trace elements almost always will be available in adequate amounts. Since vegetables vary in the kinds and amounts of nutrients they take from the soil, rotating crops from one part of the garden to another will help guard against depletion of a particular trace element in a certain spot. In making an organic fertilizer mixture, the basic NPK must be supplied, but it isn't necessary to be concerned about exact equivalents for the percentages given on the fertilizer bag. Just use common sense. A balance is what you're striving for, so you wouldn't use all one nutrient source and nothing else. Some common organic sources of plant nutrients are nitrogen, animal manure, cottonseed meal, blood meal, bone meal. Phosphorus, bone meal, fish scrap, phosphate rock. Potash, wood ashes, granite dust, seaweed. All of the above substances can be added to a compost pile to enrich the resulting decomposed material before it is put into the garden. The next chapter tells you how. They may also be applied as a side dressing in the row during the growing season, or incorporated into the soil before planting. Chemical fertilizers may be used, but should be applied in moderation with careful attention to proper application, lest the plants be burned. Their use should in no way replace or even slow down a continuing program of organic soil building. All tied up with the fertility of the soil or its ability to support plant growth is a relative acidity or alkalinity. We express it as the pH of the soil. How sour, acid, or sweet, alkaline, your growing medium does influence the growth of the plants. But, fortunately, most of the vegetables we grow thrive and do well with a pH range of 6 to 7.5. On the scale of 1 to 14, that's about mid-range. Anything below 7 is considered sour. Anything above 7 is sweet. As you begin to plan your garden, you can find out the pH of your soil by having a soil test made. There are kits that let you do this yourself, but it is probably easier and more practical to contact your county agricultural agent and let the experts tell you what you want to know. They can advise you on how to correct any deficiencies or problems once they see the test results and know what you want to grow. Incidentally, most county agents and the state laboratories that do analysis for them are swamped with requests for soil tests around early spring planting time. Do them and yourself a favor by getting yours done in an off month if you can. Well, a very acid soil, pH of 5 to 5.5, is fine for certain crops like blueberries or watermelons. Most vegetables will not do well under those conditions. In general, if your pH is below 6, you'll want to raise it. And you can do this by adding dolomite lime. You can get a specific recommendation as to amount from your county agent, or you can figure on about 5 pounds to 100 square feet of earth, using more or less according to your pH reading. Sprinkle the dolomite lime over the tilled surface of the soil like sugar over a donut. Lime takes a while to get in there and start working, so it should be applied 4 to 5 weeks before the plants will need it. You won't need to get your soil tested every year, and you will probably find that as organic materials are continually added to the soil over a period of years, the pH seems to stabilize. Vegetables with a variety of pH preferences will grow happily together, both cantaloupes and beets, that like a soil on the sweet side and spinach that prefers a more acid medium can flourish in the same plot without special treatment as long as organic matter is plentiful. A great way to get that organic matter is through composting. Chapter 2, Compost, Rubbish to Riches. In the European countryside, the wealth of a farmer traditionally has been judged by the size of his manure heap. This status symbol and its source, the barn, were often placed quite close to the house. Breathing the air so redolent of their prosperity, the farmer and his family may have shared the sentiment, sometimes voiced by inhabitants of towns whose only industry is a paper mill. It smells like money. You don't have to rationalize or smell a compost pile, but it can yield the same kind of riches. It needn't be a pile, in fact. A pit will do as well, and sometimes better in a limited space. By whatever method you choose to make it, compost can begin right in your garden. Separate the garbage, taking out things like metal, glass, plastic, and fat. Nearly everything else has compost potential. Naturally, you wouldn't compost poisons, chemical compounds like detergents, or similar dubious substances. A little paper is okay, but not a lot is recommended. The rule of thumb is anything vegetable or animal, except for that fat, which doesn't break down well and tends to draw ants. No family kitchen can supply all the waste you're likely to want once you get hooked on compost. Start looking around for other sources of supply. You may be surprised at what you come up with. A restaurant might save its coffee grounds, tea leaves, eggshells. A barber shop is the source for human hair clippings, an exceedingly rich source of nitrogen, 17 or 18% by volume. Feathers are good for nitrogen too. Is there any sort of chicken operation near you? Wood chips and bark from any manufacturing process where they are a waste product will add nutritional variety to the compost. A grocer or produce market manager might be glad to let you have spoiled vegetables. The hulls from a mechanical pea sheller are another possibility. Fish scrap and crab shells, crushed or ground, animal manures from stable, farmyard, or kennel are all prime composting material. Don't neglect weeds, shrubbery, prunings, leaves, and vegetable wastes from your own yard and garden or your neighbor's. For urban gardeners, plastic bags of leaves stacked at curbside awaiting trash collectors are a major source of composting material. Watch for them. Or arrange in advance to pick up leaves from a lawn that is being raked. Competition with other gardeners can be keen. Look around for other things to compost. Using your ingenuity, you can recycle waste into good garden soil and remove potential pollution sources at the same time. If the pit method of composting appeals to you, start by digging a hole as small as 12 inches square by 12 inches deep, or larger if you like. Leave the earth piled at one side. In the bottom of the pit, place a layer of wastes, kitchen garbage, or what you have, and cover it with a 1 to 1.5 inch layer of the earth you dug from the hole in the first place. Add a small sprinkling of dolomite lime, if you have it. If pets are a problem, cover the hole with a weighted board or lid of some kind. Repeat the layering process as you have waste material until the pit is full, mounding it up to allow for decomposition and settling. In about 10 to 12 weeks, that mound will mark the richest spot in your yard. The soil there will have a spongy texture and a mellow apple-like smell. Squeeze a handful. It won't gum like clay or sift through your fingers like sand. And if there's been any variety at all in your waste materials, you are holding in your hand just about the best plant food there is. Now, you can remove the compost from the pit and use it around the garden or for pot plants. Just plant something in right where it is. Or you might leave it there and enjoy the thought of what you've accomplished. Turning waste to soil and move on to dig in another spot. Starting all over again. If your supply of waste material is sufficient, you can have several pits going at once, situated where you want to plant things when the decomposition is complete. Next time, however, you might want to try a compost pile. Select a spot on the ground in full sun or semi-shade. Make the pile only 5 feet wide and 5 feet high, but as long as necessary, judging your space accordingly. Certainly your supply of raw materials will influence the size of the pile. As a rule, the more varied the materials, the greater the variety of nutrients in the finished product. Don't waste anything you can compost. Put down an 8-inch thick layer of green stuff. That's grass, leaves, weeds, kitchen wastes, anything you've gathered. Obviously, it doesn't have to be green. On top of this, spread a layer of stable manure 2 inches thick, or use any other activator rich in nitrogen, like cottonseed meal or bone meal, in a thin layer. There are also commercial compost activators on the market, substances that you can add to your compost pile if you can't get enough nitrogen from natural materials. And nitrogen is the key. Without a sufficient supply, the compost won't heat up because decomposition will be extremely slow. It's even possible to use a nitrogen-rich commercial fertilizer like 1555 as an activator. Sprinkled on the pile like sugar or a donut. It can replace each layer of manure, but it won't contribute any soil conditioning organic matter on its own. Add a 1-inch layer of earth from the garden. You'll put it back later, or any other loamy soil. Sprinkle the earth layer with dolomite lime, again, like sugar on a donut. A generous sprinkling of water should follow this before you start another series of layers. This 3-layer series should be repeated as rapidly as material is available, building the pile to its maximum height of 5 feet in a day or two if possible. When the pile reaches 5 feet in height, leave a slight saucer-like depression in the final layer to gather a reasonable amount of rain. The pile must be moderately wet to work well, so if a dry period sets in, apply water occasionally. On the other hand, if flooding rains occur, cover the whole thing, because it is a good idea to build the pile all at once, so you'll have the finished compost ready all at one time. You should gather a good supply of composting materials before starting the pile. If that's impractical, use the pit system. Grass, leaves, and other such material can be piled for storage in and out of the way corner. Kitchen wastes can be cooking in containers or plastic bags sealed tightly to eliminate odor and insects and placed safely out of the way of people and pets. If you must store manure, protect it from the leaching effects of rainwater. Cover the pile with a sheet of heavy plastic staked down, or place it under a shed if that's convenient. Ideally, all the materials used to build the pile, except the earth and lime, should be put through a shredder in the interest of speeding the day when you'll have the finished compost. Whole leaves, for instance, mat together in a shingle effect, shedding air and water. If they are shredded 30 to 40 times, the original surface area is exposed to air, and the process of decomposition is greatly accelerated. A compost pile made with shredded materials will be ready for garden use in 3 to 4 weeks. And you won't have to turn it with a spade, especially if you use the stake insertion method described later. Unshredded materials will take from 3 to 6 months to compost thoroughly, and the pile should be thoroughly turned frequently to aid aeration and to bring the outside to the center where the action is. With shredded material, the 5-foot high height, and width allows necessary oxygen to reach the microorganisms responsible for decomposition of the pile. You can speed things up by inserting 6-foot tomato stakes or anything of suitable size in the pile as it's being built up. Begin after the second green stuff manure earth series and lay the stakes across the pile so that 6 inches or so will protrude on either side of the 5-foot width. Space the stakes about 3 feet apart and continue to build the pile, adding more sticks at every second layer of earth. You'll use these stakes somewhat as a cook uses a cake tester. During the first 5 days after the pile is put together, it will, if properly made, begin to heat up. About the 5th day, pull out a couple of the sticks and test for warmth. Don't be surprised if the sticks are uncomfortably hot to the touch. Temperatures of over 150 degrees are not uncommon in an active compost pile. This has a side benefit too. It would be very difficult for a weed seed to come through that heat alive. If your test sticks show that the inside of the pile is hot, take out all the others because it's working. Besides testing for heat, the removal of the sticks leaves holes which let more oxygen into the interior of the pile, further stimulating decomposition. After a week or so at the high temperature stage, the mass begins to cool down gradually. In no more than 4 weeks from the time you completed building the pile, the compost should be finished and ready for the garden if you used shredded materials. The end product is a good, safe fertilizer that can be applied without fear of burning the plants. It's a good soil conditioner too, and the very moisture retentive qualities it imparts to your garden soil make sure its nutrients don't leach out with the first heavy rain. Compost can be used in raised beds and containers as well as in the garden. Some plants thrive in pure compost. Tomatoes, cucumbers, squash, corn, peppers, lettuce, and carrots, to name a few. But for most others, mixing it with earth is quite satisfactory. Compost can also be used to start seed or when setting plants in the garden or applied as a side dressing to growing crops. Break. Do you like gardening books? Check in the links below for more gardening books like this. And don't forget to subscribe below. End break. Chapter 3. Mulch, the magic carpet. A mulch, by definition, is any material used to cover the soil in which plants are growing. You don't have to mulch your vegetables, but it can make gardening a lot easier if you do. Any mulch, properly applied and maintained, will eliminate weeds, make cultivation during growing unnecessary, control erosion, retain moisture, keep dirt off plants and fruit, regulate soil temperature, and keep the soil friable rather than baked hard or excessively muddy. You can even walk through the garden with your white shoes on. But best of all, you won't need the wide open spaces necessary for big plows and tractors. Much more of your plot can actually be used for growing vegetables. A variety of materials are used as mulches: plastic, aluminum, building paper or newspaper, wood bark chips, well-rotted sawdust, grass clippings, hay, shredded leaves, including pine straw, peanut hulls, seaweed, you name it. You can use whatever is readily available to you. If you choose the mulch method over cultivation, the organic mulches like hay, leaves, and grass add nutrients and humus to the garden because they decompose in place. So they play a vital part in the soil building process that's basic to growing really good vegetables. Organic mulches also encourage earthworms, a friendly kind of fauna that's helpful to have around. These little animals work through the soil of your garden thoroughly, helping to aerate it, enriching it meanwhile with their castings. When you apply a mulch, is important to decide. Think for a moment about the insulating qualities of the mulch and about what you're trying to accomplish in the way of soil temperature control. If the crop you are planting likes warm soil, tomatoes, beans, squash, and most spring garden vegetables do, don't apply much until after the soil is really warm in the latter part of the spring. Trying to carry a second planting of those vegetables into cooler fall weather, you could mulch to retain heat in the soil when air temperatures fall. You'll know when the soil is warm because you can feel the difference by digging your fingers into it a little. You can usually see the suddenly faster rate of growth in the plants themselves, too. If the crops you are growing are, for example, English peas and Irish potatoes, both of which prefer a cool soil, a mulch will keep it that way when air temperatures rise, especially in the season, late in the season, or during unseasonably warm weather. Here in the South, the soil can warm up fast in the spring to a point that these plants don't like. A mulch is a great moderator, holding the cool about the roots in spite of the sun. You don't have to wait for soil to warm up to put down mulch between rows of the garden. You can do this as soon as the rows are laid out. It makes for easier walking and keeps the soil from compacting. Some of this mulch, with more added, can later be used to pull up around the plants as they begin to grow, keeping in mind the maintenance of an appropriate soil temperature. There is another advantage to early mulching between rows. If the mulch is used in organic material, it will begin the process of decomposition and soil building right away. By the time the crops in the rows are on either side are harvested, the between row area is an enriched spot for planting something else, or maybe a second or third planting of the same vegetable. For example, with Tallahassee weather conditions, Irish potatoes and English peas can be planted in January. Low temperatures may occasionally cut them to the ground, but they quickly recover and are rarely killed outright. Between the rows of these vegetables, rows are raised a few inches above overall ground level. A mulch is put down. Finished compost, cottonseed meal, etc. can be put in first under the mulch to further improve the soil. By the time the peas and potatoes have seen their better days, it will be time for a late spring planting of corn. Like magic, a lot of that mulch between the rows will have decomposed, and the rest can be worked into the soil. Presto, a great spot to plant the corn or butter peas, white acre peas, or peanuts, whatever you need. The method technically is termed sheet composting and can be used over wide areas being prepared for later planting, not just between rows. It is even possible to bury ground up kitchen wastes, no fat, under the mulch. Bones are great if you have a way to grind them too, or bury them for a long time, 5 years say. Burying by this method in a garden, you would progress systematically up and down between rows. Pull back the mulch, dig a shallow trench, put in the ground garbage, replace the dirt, and then the mulch. Mark where you stopped for a reference point the next time. The whole thing works like a series of long, shallow compost pits. Seeds and plants should not come in contact with the raw material, so such areas aren't planted until the decomposition is complete and the soil is mellow, finished compost. This takes about 3 months. It works more slowly in cold weather, somewhat faster in the heat of the summer. Nitrogen-rich substances like cottonseed meal or bone meal sprinkled in before you put back the mulch will hasten decomposition, and the same time, sprinkle of lime you gave the compost pile or pit wouldn't hurt a thing. By the time the growing season is in full swing, the whole garden is under mulch. For subsequent plantings, just part the mulch and pull it back. Pull it back more if you want the air temperature to affect the soil. As little as possible if you don't. Draw it gradually around the young plants, a layer at a time, as they begin to grow. Hay is an excellent mulch. In fact, it is possible to maintain a healthy, thriving garden by using just hay mulch and cottonseed meal. No fertilizers, no compost. Books have been written about the method. In the South, where the ground doesn't freeze, though, and where there is ample heat and rainfall, decomposition goes on all year round, and organic matter in the soil itself breaks down quickly. Growing goes on all year too, and the soils are more quickly depleted of organic material and nutrients here than in areas where the earth gets a frozen winter's respite from cultivation. Consequently, here, organic material must be added to the garden on a continuing basis and in many forms. Adding compost in addition to using an organic mulch is like taking out a second insurance policy. Incidentally, it isn't necessary to buy good hay for use as a mulch. Spoiled hay which has somehow gotten damp and is no longer good for animal fodder, is just fine. It is very inexpensive, and sometimes free for the hauling. Just check with local farmers. One word of caution. Inspect the bales carefully to see that you aren't importing the pesky fire ant into your garden with your hay. They build nests between the hay and in the ground sometimes. Just roll the bale and you'll see. To figure out how much hay you'll need, go by the size of your garden. A plot of 1,000 square feet would need only about 10 to 12 bales of hay per year to maintain a good mulch. So you can see you won't need a lot. When applying the hay, it is useful to know that an 8-inch deep layer of loose hay will compact to about 2 inches, a good depth to maintain whatever the organic material you're using. If you use hay still in bales, just peel off the slices or pads that form the bale and place them in a single thickness deep for your mulch. This layer will decompose faster than you think, and thin spots begin to show. Put on a little more mulch when they occur. See a weed? Throw a healthy clump of hay on it. Really, that's all there is to it. When you reach the end of one season's garden and begin to prepare for the next, most inorganic mulches, like plastic, will have to be removed. Any organic mulch that's left over can simply be cut into the soil. Then the whole process can start over. And every year the soil will be getting better and better.